What's up guys, it's Sam here at Cycle Technology. If you're watching this video, you might have just scanned the QR code on the box of your new bike from us. Or you might have just found a video on the internet. The purpose of this video is to show you guys everything you need to do to get out riding on your bike safely and as quick as possible. We're going to be using this Trek Marlin Plus as a demo bike for this video. This is about as disassembled as a bike will come from us. If you were to buy a Marlin, for instance, it probably will come with the front wheel out and with the handlebars off. This is because they ship in smaller boxes. E-bikes, road bikes, stuff like that usually come more assembled, but we're going to start from the bottom and work his way up. I'm going to show you how to put the pedals on properly on the right side with the opposite thread, how to put the wheel in, how to set the handlebars up, and we're going to go into some finer details about setting gears and brakes and stuff up as well. I'm going to try and give you all the information that you need so that you don't have to take that brand new bike to your local bike shop to get it sorted. I'm going to try and teach you how to do that at home. So we're going to start with the front wheel. On this particular bike, it's got a through axle. The through axle on this particular model has a 6mm Allen key. If you need to wind it out anti-clockwise, I've already pre-greased it for the purpose of this video. It's always wise to grease threads before we put stuff together. I'm going to take the front wheel with the rotor on the non-drive side of the bike. That's my right hand side looking from the front of the bike, and I'm going to make sure that rotor, as I line it up, I want it to go in between both of the brake pads as I sit the wheel in the dropouts. And once that's sat home there, I'm going to take that through axle, pop it in, again just give it a little wiggle, be gentle with it, and I'm going to use my 6mm Allen key to tighten that through axle to snug. So I'm going to go snug, and I'm just going to give it a little bit of extra pressure there to make sure it's locked in place. On the subject of installing front wheels, like I said, that one there has a through axle. Some of the bikes that come from us, like the Marlins, some of those have a quick release on them. So in a box, smaller box that comes with your bike, with the pedals in it, you'll find that you've got a quick release. You want to screw that into the wheel, usually with the clamp on the non-drive side where the brake rotor is. Put a bit of grease on there. You want one of the little curly springs on one side, one of them on the other side, and then the locking nut goes in after that. And the same thing applies when attaching this wheel to the bike. I want to lift up the front end and make sure I'm lining the rotor up with the center of the pads. There's a nice gap in between the pads that I can see. And then the thing that I do to make sure that this is centered and sat in the dropouts correctly is I lean over the front of the bike and I put a little bit of weight on the stem, and that just makes sure that the bike is sat squarely over the wheel. If I do it off to one side in any way, you can see how easy it is to get that wheel not centered in the dropouts, and then you'll have your brake rubbing and it'll ride terrible. So a little bit of weight on the front, or you can get someone else to push down on it for you if you can't reach over the front. And I want to tighten this nut up there and keep trying the cam lever on this side until it feels like it's going to be tight to close, but not so tight that I'm never going to be able to get it off again. And once it's clamped up there, that's my front wheel in situ. So the next thing I'm going to do is attach the handlebars to the stem. On this particular stem, there's a couple of little black clamps and 4 bolts in total. There are different stems, they might look different, but the same logic applies to this as it does to all the other stems. I'm going to place the handlebars into the stem, being careful not to catch any cables or hoses behind the stem itself. I want just the handlebar sat in there, and it's a little bit tricky, but I'm going to hold the bar in place whilst I use on this stem a 4mm Allen key to wind that top bolt in. And once I've got this one in, it'll basically hold itself, and then I can retrieve the other plate from the front of the stem and the rest of the bolts. So like I said, this stem's got 2 plates on it. There are other stems that come from Trek that just have 1 big plate, and all four bolts go into that plate. On some of the higher end road bikes, those plates might have instructions on them to tighten the top bolt first, all the way till the gap is closed, and then to tighten the bottom bolt. Pay attention to those instructions and just do what it says for each individual bike. Otherwise, I want to make sure that the gaps between the clamp and the stem itself are equal at all 4 points. So I'm just going to get my handlebars lined up and centered, and there's some handy little white dots on the front of here just to help me know where the center of this is. About there. And then I'm just going to nip these up to about 6 Newton meters. Though I don't have a torque wrench in my hand, but I know what that feels like. You want to, when you're tightening these bolts, tighten them in a sort of zigzag pattern rather than round in a circle. So tighten one there, go across to the side, go down there, and then across to the other side. The next step is to put the pedals on. Now this is one of the things that we find we have most problems with when people are building bikes up themselves at home. I'm going to show you that there are 2 different threads. This is the right hand pedal, which has a normal thread on it, and if you look at this sort of hex nut part on the axle, you can see that it's just plain metal. And on the left hand pedal, it has an opposite thread on it, so this pedal has to thread in. When you tighten it up, it turns anti-clockwise, not clockwise like most of the bolts. And if you also notice here on the hex nut axle part of the bolt of the pedal, sorry, there's 3 little lines. There's a number of little lines on each face there, and that's indicating to me that this is the left hand pedal. Other pedals may have an L stamped in there or an R if it's the right hand pedal. And one other way to tell which one you've got is if you don't have any of these indicators, the threads on both of these pedals travel in different directions. The thread on the right hand pedal travels up and to the right, and the thread on the left hand pedal travels up and to the left. And one other thing to note is if you're putting these pedals in your cranks and it feels like there's a lot of resistance and it's not threading in properly, then it probably isn't, and you need to stop and have another look at what we've just talked about there. Because if you force these pedals into the wrong sides, you're going to destroy the cranks on the bike, and then it's money and time for everybody. So I'm going to show you how to install each of these pedals individually, making sure that you're tightening the right pedal onto the right side. Bit of grease on the threads to start with, always good practice. Pedals have a habit of getting seized on, so it is good to dab a bit on those threads there. We're going to start with the right hand side pedal, which is the pedal that has a normal thread in it that you'll find in most everyday things, where it winds in, tightens clockwise. So I'm going to start it by hand. I'm just going to pop that in the crank, make sure that the pedal axle is perpendicular to the crank. And when I say it should be easy, I can do this by hand. If I can't do this by hand, then I might have the wrong pedal on the wrong side of the bike. And I'm going to wind it up to the point where I can't really get my fingers in there anymore. And I'm going to get, this is a 15mm pedal spanner. Any 15mm spanner will do the trick, and on some pedals there's a bolt, there's a hole in the back for an Allen key where you can put a 6 or an 8mm Allen key. It depends on the bike. For this purpose, I'm going to use this this pedal spanner. And once I've got it all the way in, I'm just going to put that on there. And what I like to do is just rotate the crank backwards and let that do the work. It's having the same effect as turning this clockwise and tightening it up by turning the crank in the opposite direction. So once the pedal axle is snug in the crank, I've got to snug there, I just want to apply a bit of force there. I'm not swinging off it, doesn't need to be crazy, but just enough to tighten it up, and that'll do. And now moving on to the non-drive side of the bike, the left hand side of the bike, this is the opposite thread. This is the one where people seem to have trouble. So here we are on the non-drive side of the bike with the left hand crank, and this is the left hand pedal, the one that I mentioned before. It has an opposite thread on it, so it tightens anti-clockwise. So again, I'm going to put that in with a little bit of grease on it, and I'm just going to gently start that thread off by hand. And like I say, if I'm feeling a lot of resistance straight away, I've probably got the wrong pedal on the wrong side. But as you can see, that's going in nice and easily. I'm going to do the same thing with the pedal spanner. I'm going to put that in place and then back pedal the bike. I find it a lot easier to do it like this. And then once I'm snug, I'm going to just give it a nip up like I did on the drive side. And that's it, pedals installed. Just another point to make you guys aware of, a lot of these bikes are shipping from Europe, and often they come with the brakes set up the opposite way around to how we have them in the UK. So you can see on this one, the left lever, which in the UK is usually the rear brake, actually is controlling the front brake on this bike, and vice versa. So we always correct this before we ship our bikes out to the customer, so you will get it set up the standard UK way, but not all companies do that. So do check this before you go out for a ride on it. If you go to grab a fistful of rear brake to do a skid or something, you might end up just throwing yourself over the handlebars. So if you find out that your brakes are the wrong way around, take it to your local bike shop, ask them to swap the hoses over. They might need to do a brake bleed as well to sort that. So obviously we are aware that we've made this video in a bike shop where we have access to stands, which is great. If you've got a stand, then this will be easier for you, but you can do all of this stuff on the ground as well. You might need to prop the bike up somewhere or even get someone to hold it for you. Moving on to the last 2 points, we're going to talk about saddle height and handlebar and lever position. Saddle height to start with. Now, it is personal preference to an extent, but there are guidelines that we follow. I'm going to show you what a saddle that's set too low looks like when the rider is riding the bike. So this would be great if I was just doing jumps and stuff, but when I'm pedaling normally, if I'm pedaling around, you can see I'm with my saddle too low, I'm barely using any of the stretch of my leg and any of the strength or the muscle, because I'm just not extending my leg fully at all. So that is why we don't have saddles set too low. If I was to set my saddle too high, I might actually fall off in a moment, but just trying to make a point. Then when my foot's at the bottom, I'm like overstretching myself and I'm locking my leg out completely. And again, it's not a comfortable or safe or ergonomic way to ride. Obviously, the ideal saddle position is going to be in the middle of both of these two places. So I'm just going to drop this down a bit, see if we've got it in the right place. When I'm riding, the ideal sweet spot for like sort of maximum efficiency and power over time is to have your leg just ever so slightly bent when sat on the saddle, and one of your pedals is at 6 o'clock. You want to have just a gentle bend in the leg, and that way when I'm pedaling, I'm using all of the stretch and all of the strength of my leg. It's going to tire me out less. I'm going to find that I can go farther, for faster, for longer. So the last thing I want to talk about before we wrap this up is handlebar and lever position. The handlebars, if you find that they're not quite straight, meaning that the handlebar's not running perpendicular to the wheel, all you need to do is loosen the bolts at the back of the stem, and then you want to hold the wheel in place. Make sure the top cap's just nipped up ever so gently. You don't want to put a lot of force on the top cap. It's just preloading the bearings there. And then I'm going to look straight down and try and line my stem up with the tyre. It might take a little bit of back and forth, but once you get used to it, you'll see that that's straight. The handlebars are running, yeah, straight across the centre of the tyre, which is how they're supposed to be. Again, nipping that up to about 6 Newton meters. On this particular stem, it's a 4mm Allen key. Others might have a 5. Some have a 6. And the other thing that I see a lot of is people riding with their levers like pointing up into the air, and I often want to shout at them like, sort your levers out, or come here and I'll sort them out for you, because it really annoys me. But the most ergonomic way to have your levers set is that when you're on the bike in your natural riding position, just to have it all in line with your forearm. So if your forearm's running down at 45 degrees, then your levers want to be coming off your handlebar at 45 degrees. Otherwise, what's happening is your arm is coming like this into your handlebar, and then you're braking like this, and you're taking all this force on a bent wrist all the time, and it's not good. You'll wish you'd done it differently when you were older, I would imagine. So yeah, setting up this bike for myself, I just look at where my forearm sits, loosen my lever off, point it to the same direction as my forearm, and just nip it up. Again, some have a 4mm Allen key, some would need a 5, and I just check across and make sure both my levers are set to the same place. And then my shifter, I push it up so that it butts against the bottom of the lever, and then I back it off about 1/8 of a turn, and I find that a nice comfortable place to have my trigger shifters for my rear or front derailleur if you've got one. Yeah, that all feels nice to me. One other thing you can adjust as well is the reach of the lever. Just on the inside of the lever here, there's a little 2mm Allen key, and if you wind that in clockwise, it'll move the lever away from the handlebar. If you wind it anti-clockwise, it'll bring the lever in. So again, personal preference, depending on the size of your hand, you might want to have a little play around with that as well. And of course, if you're unsure about any of this stuff, please just do go to your local bike shop. You'll save yourself time, money and hassle, and possibly injury in the future. But if you're confident after watching this video, grab some tools and have a go at it. Happy trails.
Bye.